This presentation will describe a series of experimentation with satellite and net communication in music from 1960s onwards. In the enormous reconstruction of societies after World War II, science and technology were central tools of progress. But new technologies that could erase humans and destroy their environment also led to increasing criticism. Communication technology with satellites, however, was cheered as an even global unifier of mankind. The breakups in youth and countercultures from the 1960s were, however, general ones. In our interview and questionnaire studies of youth groups in Europe, Africa, and Asia at Media Culture, University of Oslo at the time, we found, for instance, very strong general rejection of technology in the Western youth culture, but strong support for it in the non-Western ones, which made, for instance, interviewed hippie groups then coming to Nepal as foreign in the new setting as in the ones that they had fled. For one way, like television or serial telephone messages, advances of the new technology were easily noticed, in spite of, for instance, transmission delays. In our study of astronauts in 1975, such serial functionality was basic even in their communication between the moon and the Earth. But what about continuous interaction, like in musical, visual, or bodily communication? Here the effects, for instance, of delays are not as easily determined. Could experimentation in art have any relevance? For a communication sociologist, early processes could make it possible to study initial encounters of humans with new technologies before any mainstream new social uses of them, and principally in relation to general cultural orientations, even singular observations in art deviating from such general approaches and thus testing zero hypotheses would be relevant. The general socio-cultural breakup also opened many art activities. In jazz music, for instance, it entered free jazz. As a jazz musician myself, I worked on a ship to New York in 1960, hearing, for instance, Ornette Coleman at his historic appearance with free jazz at the Five Spot Club. Such emerging art processes with more than one possible outcome also made experimentation with art methodologically relevant for research. We started with video and computers in music, like the Data Morgana in 1961, at first played by musicians, as the computers then could not play until they could. It proceeded with the DIMI computers constructed by the Finnish pioneer Erkki CeReNeM. Here actors, for instance, in a Beckett play in 1972, cannot escape that their movements also get sound coordinates added to them, and possibly extending or conflicting with their scenic kinetic expressions. Here's a short sequence in Beckett's Act Without Words 2, indicating how the computer may scan and sonify moves and stage. I regret the technical quality of the 50 years old tapes. We call this an artificial reality. Then virtual reality became the usual term. We could program the sound output in various ways. For instance, so that actors would throw away their facial stage makeup and draw drastic linings in their face that made their mimics acceptable as sounds. Or actors' movements could produce applause sounds, thus stealing one of an audience's few means of communication. Such critical applications of a virtual reality here may not only challenge and extend actors' scenic language, it could even inflict on the institutional balance of communications between parties in the theater. And then into satellites. In 1972, our first tests were made. They indicated that transmission delays in continuous musical interaction may lead to particular tensions, incompatible or antinomic aspects of that interaction. Various basic problems and a set of strategies of coping with them were explored in Satellite Music Interaction 1 on net satellite communication and composition in 1973. Strategies may be like ignoring the system or attempts to change it, identifying satellite delays as systemic rhythms, or by repression, forget the satellite, just play, or resignation, no playing. The design was generalized and applied first with musicians, then with visual artists and the ballet dancers, none of them with any previous experience with such technologies. Here we comment only on the experimentation with music groups. In the first experiment, a flute quartet plays Western classical chamber music. First, they perform as usual, face to face, and they even are able to form when they are split into two sides with a close net connection. With the satellite net conditions, however, their playing is disrupted. The musicians react, for instance, by criticizing the musicians at the other side as playing or counting incorrectly, as what they hear from the other side does not comply with the composition. In spite of a series of ingenious suggestions, like complicated ways of counting, they cannot find a solution. The musical attempts never succeed. Here is an indication of incompatibilities and tension in the musical interaction. The upper two screens indicate the real-time playing, and lower screens that transmitted delayed ones, received at the other side. Here we may, however, only tap one of the parallel combinations of sounds and delays in this matrix of relations.
1, 2, 3.
After several unsuccessful attempts, those at one side even suggest to sacrifice themselves, to play on even when that is musically meaningless, does not fit with what they receive from the others, in order for that other side to obtain a correct combination of voices and musical meaning. Next, a group of jazz musicians goes further, as they, for instance, are able to identify parameters of the temporal modifications, the systemic rhythms of the satellite net. The jazz musical base provides freedom of registering, generating and ordering musical elements and dynamics of the temporality. They may, for instance, neutralize impacts of systemic rhythms by drowning them, adding new, complex ones. Here is a short audio sequence from the experimentation. The jazz musicians thus are able to continue their interaction with a kind of musical base with degrees of freedom that this Western chamber music is lacking. The antinomies of the satellite net systems challenge all kinds of communication. Therefore, vast control efforts at delay reduction are made in many fields, from process industries and military distance attack systems to digital stock exchange, or in games and music studios. Such attempts at reductions are, of course, confined by the speed of light. Jamaican roots musicians in a 1978 experimentation, however, contrarily and surprisingly, preferred a change and increase of the satellite transmission delays from one jump to a more delaying two-jump satellite system, which actually is the one that may reach and thus unite the whole globe, which also may question a general necessity of delay reduction and indicate that there may even be other and more specifically cultural ways of coping with such systemic problems. The early 1973 study considered various other problems. We here may exemplify one, that is the delays blocking possibilities of simply starting together in systems with delay. This was, for instance, observed in a start sequence in a three-country net concert and performance between Oslo, Helsinki, and Warsaw in 1998, facilitated by Göran Rudi, transmitted from the Media Culture Knowledge Channel Studio, University of Oslo. Here is a sequence from the Warsaw site, with incoming screen pictures and sound from Oslo and Helsinki. The musicians are awaiting each other, and the playing here in Warsaw starts only after receiving from someone elsewhere who has started to play previously, alone, without awaiting others. The silence here may confirm a theorem like starting together between two sites in a delaying system is impossible. And by the way, when it is the net system itself that upholds waiting and silence, could such systems even automatically be mass producers of like John Cage 433 concerts? Here the musicians share that silence before one of them unilaterally breaks it. But when they play, however, the music is delayed and the concert now comes out as 3 different sub-concerts in Oslo, Helsinki, and Warsaw. Here we hear, of course, only the Warsaw version. And then when the playing proceeds, it may be pointing towards another possible theorem, the possibility of sharing in delaying net by no change, by constancy. Sharing here is based on repetitions lasting longer than the delays. Now, after these 2 sequences, one might wonder, is communication in advanced net systems getting caught between John Cage and Philip Glass? But remember the Greeks, they wondered how arrows could move, but they kept on shooting with them. The antinomies of net communication systems become serious as systems are spatially extended, even towards international or global inclusion. That is when the practical and theoretical problems become inescapable. In the present projects, analytical tools like models of cultural forms of uncertainty, entropy, and temporal dynamics of communicative acts, for instance, categories for analyzing temporal reference functions, like prediction, codiction, and postdiction in musical acts. Such studies may even be supported by developments of artificial intelligence. The possible preciseness of such automatic tools may, however, be questioned. For instance, as they would not only predict acts of the other musicians in delays, but even lead to basic problems of self-reference in relating to the very act of playing of any musician herself. Net penetration varies across countries and social groups. In net systems between closed sites, musicians may share more or less the same signals across the sites, and thus be transmitted like as one concert from one site. But you may also find quasi and simulated musical interaction, like when this picture indicates that some 900 brass band musicians are playing together from home sites. It may indicate an extensive matrix of interaction, but often a reduced one, as when the musicians do not hear each other, but play individually with a control site that publishes it on the net. This may have ceremonial, commercial, political, or artistic purposes, even to an extent that interaction is faked. During crises like pandemic, lockdown of work, education, care, and culture, such performances may, for instance, manifest that people still are alive, but also how hierarchy, blocking of interaction in the system may confine communicative potentials. In an earlier American project, for instance, some sites and communicators were declared as slaves, thus contributing raw musical material to a master site and to a musical meaning they do not share. The use of nets, including concerts, increased dramatically during the pandemic. In 2021, in Norway, for instance, 35% of the population received net concerts, surpassing 23% who attended ordinary physical ones. It occurs on a background of decades of increased net inclusion of the population. This is a global process. We have so far considered some core problems of the reciprocal net satellite communication. Let us now look at possible range of relevance of such matters as such systems approach global inclusion. Here is a present distribution of numbers of internet users across continents. These numbers vary between industrialized and developing areas, and net capacities vary and are increasing, but already more than 5 billion of people of nearly 8 billion on Earth are connected. Nets may be used in open matrices of interaction in areas with marginal delays and provide direct reciprocal sharing of communicative acts. But the problem of further participation remains. Can that sharing of bases include more distant, delayed others? Here are some present distributions of the proportions of populations with net access, varying between continents, but all have passed 50% of the population, except for Africa, which also is closing in. Thus, areas representing large clusters of people and of potential reciprocal interaction are at distance from each other. So again, what about delays? Could distant areas, like continents, each one with their own areas within which people may have non-delayed direct sharing of non-serial communication, like music? Could such areas even be moving culturally differently? Could communication technologies turn, for instance, continental cultures into digital versions of tectonic plates, apart and colliding now and then, and into a global culture of net concerts, differing from traditional ones in being sets of concerts, differing between sites? Hierarchical applications of net systems are already overwhelming, like when enormous companies control even the personal informations of growing proportions of a mankind that was promised something, not Orwell's 1984, but systems that unify. One of the strategies found in our 1973 studies is still around. Forget the net, just play it. It seems, however, inadequate. The question remains, what may be shared in systems that even shatter basic presence with others? And can art challenge hierarchical dominance? But again, let's not forget the relevance of deviant examples and of zero hypotheses in falsifying general notions. Here we have presented just some examples of music cultural forms and elements varyingly able to cope with sharing in the antinomies of the reciprocal net communication. They may even indicate that non-hegemonic, like non-Western ones, may be better equipped for that than hegemonic traditional Western ones of the cultures that produced and has controlled that technology. For music and technology, music production in studios and privately are central aspects. The communication of music, developing types of music that can cope with the potentials and the dilemmas and antinomies of the systems become more vital as the inclusion of mankind into net system increases. Communication systems are including people all over the world. Sharing that includes people anyhow may be vital for peace and development in the coming world. It deserves the attention and efforts of identifying elements and forms of such communication, and of constituting new ones in cultural work and empirical and critical research. Such results, for instance in music, thus may even be relevant beyond the realm of music itself.